When I got the call from Professor Grant, I figured it was just another gig cataloging artifacts. That's what I do. Historical records, artifacts from digs, obscure junk most people wouldn't think twice about. But when he told me what the job was, my stomach tightened. "We've uncovered something," he said, voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Something from Roanoke, the lost colony. Everyone knows the story. Over 100 settlers vanished without a trace in 1590. All they left behind was the word CROATOAN carved into a tree. Theories ranged from starvation to hostile tribes, but nothing ever explained the total disappearance. I've always been fascinated by it, and that's why I should have said no. Instead, I found myself standing in a damp basement at a small university in North Carolina, staring at a wooden crate marked with strange symbols I didn't recognize. "Found it buried under an old church foundation," Grant said, handing me gloves. "Sealed tight. Must have been down there for centuries." I pried the lid open, the wood splintering with a groan. Inside were artifacts, hand-carved wooden figures, rusted tools, and a bundle of aged leather that looked like a journal. That's when the smell hit me. It was faint, but unmistakable, earthy and metallic, like dried blood mixed with damp soil. "What's that smell?" I asked, pulling the journal out. Grant didn't answer. He was staring at the wooden figures, his face pale. "Look at them," he whispered. I did. The carvings were crude, but unsettling. Each one depicted a distorted human form, their faces elongated, their mouths stretched wide in expressions of agony. One figure stood out. It was larger than the others, carved from dark wood. Its face wasn't human, its eyes were hollow holes, and its mouth was filled with jagged teeth. "What the hell is that supposed to be?" I asked. Grant shook his head. "We don't know." I set the figures aside and opened the journal. The handwriting was faded but legible, written in Old English. March 1590. They have come again. The first night, they took the children. We found their bones in the morning, stripped clean and arranged in a circle. We prayed to God, but he does not answer. We carved the name of the island, but it will not save us. I glanced at Grant. "Who's they?" He didn't respond. He was still staring at the dark wooden figure, his hands trembling. I flipped through more pages, the writing growing more frantic. "They walk in the dark. Their skin is pale, and their eyes are black as the sea. They do not speak, but they smile with mouths full of teeth." The next page was stained with something dark and crusted. Blood. We tried to leave. The boats never returned. They dragged us back to the forest. They made us watch. A chill ran down my spine. Then, at the very back of the journal, a final entry, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "They are not men. They are not gods. They are something older. They have always been here." I closed the journal, my hands shaking. "What is this?" Grant finally tore his gaze from the figure. "There's more." He led me to another room. Inside was a stone slab, carved with symbols that matched the ones on the crate. In the center of the slab was a deep, jagged gouge. "We found this near the crate," Grant said. "We think it's a sacrificial altar." I backed away, my heart pounding. "Sacrificial to what?" Grant didn't answer. Suddenly the lights flickered, casting the room into shadow. The air grew colder, and that smell, earthy, metallic, grew stronger. Then we heard it. A low, guttural clicking sound, like bones snapping. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Grant nodded, his eyes wide with terror. "It's them." Before I could ask what he meant, something moved in the shadows. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but then I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were empty pits, and its mouth stretched wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. It stepped closer, its movements jerky, unnatural, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. The clicking sound grew louder, coming from its throat as it tilted its head, studying us. "They were never lost," Grant whispered. "The colony didn't vanish. They became this." The creature opened its mouth wider, the clicking turning to a guttural growl. More figures emerged from the darkness, each one more grotesque than the last. Skinless faces, elongated limbs, twisted, gnarled fingers. "They're still here," Grant whispered, his voice trembling. "They've always been here." The thing stepped closer, its hollow eyes locked on us. Its skin, pale and stretched tight, shimmered faintly in the dim light, and I realized with growing horror that it wasn't skin at all, it was something else. A thin membrane, translucent, and beneath it, things moved. Things with too many legs. Grant backed into the altar, his eyes darting around the room for a way out. I didn't move. Couldn't. The creature was inches from me now, close enough that I could hear the faint wheeze of its breath and the wet clicking of its teeth. It bent down, lowering its face to mine. Up close, I could see that its eye sockets weren't empty. There was something inside, small, glistening shapes that writhed like maggots, pressing against the thin membrane as though eager to break free. It tilted its head, studying me, its mouth twitching at the corners like it was trying to smile. Then it spoke. Its voice was a dry rasp, like wind scraping across brittle leaves. The words sounded ancient, wrong, and I didn't understand them, but Grant did. "It's not time," he translated, his voice barely above a whisper. The creature's mouth stretched wider, revealing teeth that spiraled endlessly down its throat. It leaned closer to me, its breath cold and smelling of soil and rot. The words came again, slow and deliberate. Grant's voice shook as he translated. "You're not ready." "Ready for what?" I managed to choke out. The creature didn't answer. Instead, it reached out with one elongated finger and pressed it against my chest. The nail was black, cracked, and felt like ice against my skin. Images flooded my mind. The settlers of Roanoke, their faces twisted in fear, running through the forest as these things hunted them, screams in the night, rituals around the altar, and something older, something buried deep in the earth waiting to wake. The creature pulled its hand back and stood. It turned to Grant, tilting its head again. "You called us," it rasped, its voice like dry paper tearing. Grant fell to his knees. "We wanted to know the truth." The creature's hollow eyes focused on him. "The truth is hunger." Grant's mouth opened to scream, but the creature was already moving. Its hands shot out, faster than I could comprehend, grabbing Grant by the shoulders. He thrashed and kicked, but the thing held him like he weighed nothing. It leaned in, its mouth stretching impossibly wide, teeth clicking together in anticipation. Grant locked eyes with me. "Run," he whispered. I didn't, because the creature wasn't looking at me anymore. It was looking past me. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw them, dozens of them, emerging from the shadows, twisted, grotesque figures with hollow eyes and mouths that never stopped moving. Their teeth clicked in unison, creating a sound like bones snapping. The first creature let go of Grant, dropping him to the floor. He scrambled backward, gasping, as the others gathered around. They didn't attack. They only watched. And then, in unison, they spoke in that same rasping voice. "Not yet." Grant looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "They're waiting." "For what?" I asked, my voice shaking. The creature closest to me grinned, its teeth glistening. "For the ones who will bring them back." I stumbled backward, heart racing. "Bring what back?" The creature's grin widened. "The ones who left before." It reached out again, fingers brushing my temple. This time, I didn't see the settlers. I saw myself, walking through dark forests, speaking the name carved into the tree. And behind me, a figure far older than any of the creatures in this room, something ancient, something hungry. The creature pulled its hand away, leaving a burning mark on my skin. You will know when it is time." And then they faded into the dark, their clicking teeth echoing long after they disappeared. Grant lay on the floor, trembling. We never should have looked. I helped him up, the burn on my temple still throbbing. We didn't talk about it after that. We left the artifacts in the basement and locked the door behind us. Grant told me he'd handle it, bury it, destroy it, do something, but I never followed up. I just wanted to forget. Even though the nightmares started almost immediately, months would pass with the same recurring nightmares. I dreamt of the creature's hollow eyes and twisted mouth. I dreamt of the dark forest, its trees pressing in like twisted fingers, and that terrible clicking sound. But the worst part was the voice. It whispered in every dream, faint at first, but growing louder each night. Go back. No matter where I was or what I did, I couldn't escape it. I heard it in the wind, in the creak of my house at night. Even when I was awake, the burn on my temple would flare up, and I'd swear I heard that awful hum growing stronger. I tried to push it out of my mind. I told myself it wasn't real, that it was just my brain trying to process what we saw. But then last week, I woke up in a cold sweat, the sheets soaked, my heart pounding, and for the first time, the voice wasn't whispering anymore. Go to Roanoke. I couldn't ignore it any longer. That's why I called Grant. His voice on the other end was tired, strained, like he hadn't slept in days. I've been waiting for you to call, he said quietly. You've been hearing it too, I said. Grant let out a shaky breath. Every day, every night, it doesn't stop. There was a long pause. Neither of us wanted to say what we both knew had to be said. We need to go back, I finally whispered. Grant didn't argue. A week later, we met at the edge of the island. The place was desolate, trees bent from the wind, the shoreline eroded and empty. There was no trace of the colony anymore, just a quiet, unsettling stillness. This is where we found the altar, Grant said, pointing toward a patch of overgrown forest. We walked in silence, following a faint trail through the woods. Every step felt heavier, like the island itself was pulling us deeper. Finally, we reached a clearing. The altar was still there, cracked and weathered, the symbols on its surface barely visible. But the gouge in the center, where the sacrifices were made, looked fresh, like it had been used recently. Grant swallowed hard. Do you feel it? I did. The hum. It vibrated through the air, through the ground beneath our feet. We shouldn't be here, Grant muttered. But I was already stepping forward, drawn to the altar like something was pulling me. The burn on my temple throbbed harder, and the voice in my head returned, louder than ever. You've come back. I dropped to my knees, my hands pressing against the cold stone. The hum grew louder, and from the shadows of the trees, something moved. Grant, I whispered. He didn't answer. I turned to look at him, and my heart froze. He was staring at the altar, his eyes wide and blank, his lips moving silently. No, I whispered, standing and grabbing his arm. We need to leave. But he didn't move. And then, from the forest, the clicking sound began. They were coming back. Only this time, I wasn't sure if we were going to leave the island at all. I tugged at Grant's arm, but he didn't budge. His lips kept moving, whispering something I couldn't make out. His eyes locked on the altar. The hum grew louder, vibrating through my skull, and the clicking echoed from all directions, closing in fast. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on something buried in the dirt. A small carved figure. It looked just like the ones we'd found in the crate. The same crude, twisted features, the elongated face, and that gaping mouth. But this one was different. It wasn't human. It was me. The figure in my hand had the same burn carved into its temple. The details were rough but unmistakable, the clothes I was wearing, the shape of my face, even the hollow, haunted eyes. The hum spiked, nearly deafening now, and the voice whispered again. You are part of it. I dropped the figure like it burned me, my heart hammering in my chest. Behind me, Grant finally spoke aloud, his voice distant, mechanical. "They've been waiting for you." And when I looked up, I saw them. Dozens of pale figures emerging from the trees, their eyeless faces locked on me. Each of them holding carved figures of their own. Each one carved in my image. The hum swelled, drowning out my thoughts. "It's time." I couldn't move. The figures from the trees kept coming, their carved effigies clutched tightly in skeletal hands. Every figure was me, some carved in different poses, some with cracks running down their faces, but all unmistakably me. Grant was still whispering at the altar. His voice was steady now, like he was repeating something he'd practiced. A chant, maybe. A prayer. I wanted to run, but the hum was inside me, deep in my chest, vibrating my bones. One of the creatures stepped forward. It held out a figure that was pristine, newly carved. I reached for it without thinking, my fingers wrapping around the smooth wood. It was warm to the touch. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The creature tilted its head, and it attempted to put together sounds that resembled words, "Because you never left."